Caught my wife cheating at a friend's party. W him she screamed when saw I was going to get revenge. Although I apologize if I don't follow the usual narrative structure, this is more of a therapeutic outlet for me and healing takes time. I've been married to my wife for 4 years now. We're still relatively new to marriage, but we dated for 2 years before tying the knot. Our relationship appeared strong with no signs of trouble. Our love was genuine and we built a foundation of trust during our courtship. I'm 30 years old and she's 26. The incident that brought my wife's cheating to light occurred on July 4th during a party organized by my wife's friend. Let me give you a bit of context before delving into the incident itself. About a week before July 4th, my wife had mentioned that her close friend wanted us to join her July 4th celebration. We usually have a reliable babysitter for our 3-year-old, and we usually inform the sitter in advance about our babysitting needs leading up to this specific the 4th of July event. My wife informed me that she had contacted the babysitter who mentioned her schedule would be packed and she couldn't make it. I was a bit disappointed because spending time with my wife had become rarer since we had our baby. My wife expressed her strong desire to attend the event and suggested that I stay home with our child while she goes to her friend's party. I wanted her to have fun, so I agreed and said I'd take care of our child at home. Now here's the twist. My wife knew I wasn't exactly a big fan of her friend. Her friend is still single. And while my wife is 26 years old, her friend is 3 years younger and a bit more carefree. I don't want to come across as controlling, especially since my wife is an adult. I simply advise her to watch out for her friend because she might not be the best influence. Now, on the morning of July 4th, I took an unusual step and decided to call the babysitter myself. Normally, my wife handles these arrangements, and I had to find the sitter's number on my wife's phone. My thinking was that if I offered the babysitter a higher hourly rate, she might change her mind and agree to take care of my child that evening. If it works out, I plan to surprise situation, sort it out, and enjoy the satisfaction of pulling off a last-minute miracle. Things started to unravel when I called the babysitter and asked her to reconsider sitting for my son that evening, even though she had initially declined. She appeared surprised when I used the word reconsider and told me it was the first time I'd asked her about that day. Her surprise caught me off guard too, and I inquired if she remembered my wife calling her to arrange the evening a week earlier. She confirmed she hadn't received any call from my wife. I quickly improvised and told her that my wife had actually called a family member instead. That's when it became clear to me that my wife had lied for some reason. Although I couldn't figure out why it was definitely a cause for concern, I arranged for the sitter to come to our house at 10 p.m., and my wife mentioned she would be leaving around 8 p.m. for the event, before ending the call with the sitter. I made sure to tell her not to inform my wife about her coming over. I explained that I wanted to surprise my wife and keep the outing. I had planned a secret. I almost stumbled over to secure the date and time. I managed to cover it up by saying that we both thought the date night might have been canceled. But since she was on board, it would still be a nice surprise as scheduled. My wife left around 8 p.m. I waited patiently for the sitter who arrived on time. Once she was there, I headed to the party my wife had mentioned. Honestly, I had a suspicion that she might not show up and go somewhere else instead. But to my surprise, she was indeed at the party. Her friend greeted me as I arrived. Seeing me there surprised her, and she quickly called my wife over. It's an understatement to say she was just shocked. Her reaction was more like utter disbelief. It had only been around 3 hours since my wife left home, but she already seemed quite intoxicated. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her reception towards me was chilly. She repeatedly asked why I was there and who was taking care of our child. I reassured her that I had the babysitter situation under control and that she shouldn't worry. I just wanted us to enjoy the evening together and watch the fireworks display. The party itself was in a medium-sized setting with maybe 15 to 20 people squeezed into the house. One thing that stood out to me, though, was the gender ratio. There were noticeably more guys than girls, almost like a 2-to-1 ratio. We managed to move past the awkward initial interaction, but that still didn't explain why my wife had been deceptive about the outing. The events seemed to revolve around a game night with a focus on playing risque truth or dare games. I overheard one of the guys suggesting they get back to the game. I decided it was time to catch up on what I had missed and joined in with a friendly group of guys. These were the ones who were quite talkative, either due to the drinks flowing or just their outgoing personalities amidst the gathering. My wife's behavior became agitated and uneasy, and she expressed her desire to leave and go home. Her sudden request to leave raised a red flag for me, suggesting that she was definitely hiding something. I assured her we could head home, but I asked for a moment to try some of the drinks since I had just arrived. I headed to the kitchen and struck up a conversation with one of the guys there. After introducing myself to a random guy, I inquired if he was enjoying the party. He introduced himself as well, and confirmed that he was indeed having a good time. I told him I was interested in making a move on one of the girls at the party, but I wasn't sure who was available. I began pointing to the different girls one by one, and he helped me identify who was already in a relationship and who seemed open to approach using this approach. I eventually pointed to my wife without revealing her identity to the stranger. I then asked him what he thought about her. He mentioned that my wife was attractive, but he warned me that she was off limits because she arrived with a guy he knew as a friend. I pretended to be interested and asked him to share more details about this guy. The stranger went on to give me information about my wife's affair partner, explaining that they had met at a concert and had been involved with each other intimately since then. This revelation really hit me hard. The timeline of when my wife attended the concert and met this guy matched up perfectly. This struck a chord because I was also present at that very same concert. What bothered me was the fact that I was with her most of the time during the event, except when she wanted to get some snacks and insisted on going alone. I recall that it took her an unusually long time to return with her snacks, but I brushed it off, assuming there was a long line or she needed to use the restroom. This incident happened about a month prior, and ever since then she had been frequently leaving the house and even had a trip out of town. This new information left me questioning everything. The stranger was bragging about my wife as if she were some kind of prize he'd won for his friend. He kept on talking, sharing a few more details. He explained that he had come to the party to pursue my wife's friend, whom he described as a free spirit. I wasn't sure if my reaction was noticeable, but I couldn't fake it anymore. Just then, my wife's friend joined the conversation, possibly realizing that my questions were leading to the truth about my wife's affair. However, it was too late, and I could tell that she was also. But asked my wife's friend about my wife's whereabouts. She suggested checking the patio, and that's where I found my wife talking to the guy. It seemed like they were either having a heated discussion, or she was trying to convince him of something. I approached them and introduced myself to the man who was involved with my wife. But before I could say anything to him, my wife hastily pulled me away, insisting that we should leave the party. I swatted her hand away with anger and told her she could leave because I want to have a talk with the man. I confronted him directly, introducing myself as her husband. I asked him straightforwardly if he knew my wife was married before getting involved with her, considering I had already discovered the truth about their relationship. I have a somewhat imposing presence that I use to my advantage in confrontations. Honestly, I wasn't looking to fight him if he genuinely didn't know she was married. My little show of subtle aggression was meant to let my wife know that I had uncovered her infidelity and to unsettle the guy a bit. I repeated my question to him, making it clear that I didn't want to ruin the party by starting a brawl, but I needed to know if he was aware of my wife's marital status before getting involved with her. My wife was getting anxious and tried to hold me back while apologizing. The guy, seeing the bottle in my hand and realizing he was cornered on the patio with no support, fell for my act and started apologizing as well. He mentioned that he didn't intend to cause any trouble and that he had only started talking to my wife without knowing she was married. I inquired about the number of times they had been together, and he gave a response. I simply wished him a good night and walked away. I hopped in my car and drove back home. I told my wife that I wanted a divorce. I checked into a hotel where I'm writing down my story as a form of self-care. AP. I'm feeling lost about what steps to take. This is my first experience with divorce, and I'm completely unfamiliar with co-parenting since I didn't grow up in a household like that. What I do know is that I can't bear the thought of seeing that woman. And this incident is making me physically sick. I'll probably provide updates on what my next moves will be, but for now, I'm truly uncertain. Story 2. My wife was 35 years old and I was 36 when she got wind of incoming high school reunion. We lined up a babysitter for the night and were genuinely looking forward to it. I might not have known any of her old classmates, but the idea of mingling with her friends from back then was thrilling. I first crossed paths with my wife in a bar situated on the same street where we both worked. She was a hairdresser, and I was employed at a print shop. The first thing that caught my eye was her stunning hair, and then I glimpsed her eyes and I knew right then that she was going to captivate me for a long time to come. Her opening line to me was about needing a haircut, but that's a tangent. We tied the knot and welcomed 2 children into our lives. Our marriage had its imperfections, and there were instances when we thought about taking some time apart. But whenever it came to actually packing our bags, neither of us could go through with it. There was no cheating going on at that point, so it felt like every disagreement or issue could be resolved with communication and effort. Isn't that how marriages are meant to work? Our kids enjoyed a wholesome childhood, never having to overhear heated arguments. They were 13, 16 when we began preparing to attend her high school reunion about 2 weeks before the reunion. My wife went on a Facebook spree, adding a bunch of her high school buddies. Among them were a few guys, although most of them were also married. I didn't suspect anything fishy until the sound of constant dings filled the air. Throughout our time at home together, her phone was constantly chiming. I swear I even heard it while I was in the shower or on the toilet. It went off while she was cooking dinner, and even when we were saying goodnight to the kids, the excessive notifications were becoming a bit too conspicuous, and she knew it. So I finally mustered up the courage to ask her who was texting her so incessantly. Her response? It was just old high school friends catching up. Fair enough. She switched her phone to vibrate mode, and suddenly the messages seemed to stop. But one night after she had fallen asleep, I heard that faint buzzing sound again. I stared at the ceiling for a good half hour before I caved in. What I read in those messages was unsettling. It was a back and forth between her and one of the guys who would be at the reunion. In one message, she mentioned how excited she was to see him again and how wonderful it would be. In another, she questioned whether he had changed over the years, compared to when they were young. He replied that unfortunately, he could only have that kind of fun with her. She responded by saying they might have some fun at the reunion or afterward. He then pointed out that it seemed like she wanted to keep seeing him even after the reunion, and she didn't deny it. Well, I decided to have a serious talk with her about it, and she was quick to offer a heartfelt apology. She explained that he seemed lonely and in need of friends. I wasn't having any of it, though, and I made it clear that this wasn't an excuse for their discussions about having fun or continuing their interactions. After the reunion, I went further and inquired about whether they had ever been physically intimate in the past, to which she denied she didn't appear to be lying back then. But now that I know what I do, I'd say she was definitely not telling the truth. She asked if we could still attend the reunion, and I cautiously agreed, thinking that she hadn't entirely broken my trust at that point. I figured I'd be there to keep a close eye on everything. Little did I realize she kept on conversing with that man, perhaps even more than before. She made sure to get her hair and nails done before the big night out. During that eventful night, the man took a few minutes to muster the courage to reintroduce himself to my wife, all while I stood by her side. The vibe I got from him was uneasy, like he could hardly look me in the eyes, and I could tell he was desperate to reconnect with my wife. She returned his gaze, but there was an added layer of care about me. She introduced me in a friendly manner, but he wasn't fazed. He managed to position himself close enough to keep the conversation going with her throughout the evening. Everyone was indulging in drinks except for me. By the time I needed to use the bathroom, my wife was visibly drunk. I let her know I'd be back in a jiffy, but when I returned, both she and he were nowhere to be found. I looked around and asked one of the women from the reunion where they had gone. She mentioned they had stepped outside for a cigarette. Now, my wife wasn't a smoker, but I speculate that she might have gone out to keep him company. I stepped outside, scanning the area, but they were nowhere in sight. I even checked the interiors of all the cars in the parking lot. When I called her cell phone, she didn't pick up. I was both baffled and frustrated. I waited around for 45 minutes until I finally received a text message from her. It said she had gone along with the man to the nearby gas station, but since they were close to our house, he planned to drop her off there. I knew she was feeding me a load of crap. I got home about 30 minutes later to find that the babysitter had left and our kids were sound asleep. My wife was on the couch in just her underwear, also asleep. I woke her up right away and demanded an explanation. She seemed really out of it, but deep down, a part of me suspected she might be pretending. She mumbled something incomprehensible, attempting to blame that he had offered her a ride home because he wanted to talk about his own troubles. It was impossible to get any coherent information from her in that state, so I decided to wait until the morning to try and make sense of things before my wife woke up. Our teenagers filled me in on their evening with the babysitter. I could barely concentrate, but it was a relief that they were already asleep when she got home, so they didn't witness anything unusual. Once my wife was awake, I wasted no time and questioned her about the events. She griped about her fuzzy memory and expressed strong regret. Regret for leaving me there and for getting so intoxicated, you know? Really sorry. After a few hours, she had an emotional breakdown and confessed that she had remembered what actually transpired. It seemed like she somehow sensed that I would discover the truth. She disclosed that he had asked her to step outside and talk, and she agreed. He suggested they get into his car because it was chilly, and she didn't perceive any harm in that. Then she revealed that he had coerced her into kissing and having closeness, tears streaming down her face, though I suspected it was more due to being caught. I insisted on checking her phone, and she hesitated and tried to make excuses. I snatched the phone from her and retreated to the bathroom to examine it. And guess what? She had found the time to message the man and admit that their actions were a mistake. But even before that, messages from days before the reunion showed they had plotted to sneak away at some point, engage in physical activity, and even contemplated the possibility of her spending the night at his place. This was the final straw. Our marriage had reached its end. As I swung open the bathroom door, she stood there, pale as a ghost, staring at me like her entire existence was on the line. I let her know in no uncertain terms that it was over, that I couldn't continue with her after finding out about her calculated betrayal. Her tears flowed, and she begged for my forgiveness in a barely audible voice. I reminded her that even though she was intoxicated when it happened, she had planned this affair in advance. She had chosen to shatter the trust we had built over all those years. My resolve to shield her as my wife crumbled because she had willingly let another man into our life. I didn't think she could feel any lower, but my words managed to drag her further down. She curled up into a ball, her sobs echoing through the room while I went about doing her a few favors. I arranged for the kids to spend the night at their friend's place, hoping to shield them from the traumatic events. I collected as many of my wife's belongings as I could, neatly packing them away. I called her parents and explained the situation, suggesting they come and take their daughter back home, and they did just that, despite her resistance or inability. I helped her into station, but I barely acknowledged them, offering nothing more than a greeting and farewell. My wife made a few attempts to step out of the car, but they warned her that if she didn't leave with them right then, they wouldn't provide her a place to stay until she found an alternative arrangement. The weight of their words sent her into a daze. She understood that her life as she knew it had come crashing down. She remained motionless, resembling a statue as they drove her away during the divorce and custody hearings. She kept her tears as quiet as she could. Our teenagers opted to live with me, staying in the same house and going to the same school. To her credit, she owned up to her mistakes and tried her best to co-parent with me. Now that several years have gone by, we're at a point where we can at least be friendly. I'm grateful every day that I didn't force myself to stay with her and attempt to mend things. It could have been a lot more painful for me, and probably easier for her. She made her choices, and I willingly followed a different path. She struggled with it at every step, but perhaps that's what she deserved. Despite moving out multiple times, she's still living with her parents, unable to find stability since this all unfolded. I, on the other hand, got remarried about a year ago, and my new wife is remarkable and trustworthy so far. Sharing my experience is important to give hope to others grappling with their own harrowing life changes. Story 3. My child's mother betrayed me by having an affair with my best friend back when we were just dating. I had no clue that she was meeting up with my best friend at 5 in the morning to hit the gym after my work shifts in the afternoon. My friend and I would work out together. Interesting. Early, she would sometimes show up there unexpectedly and focus on me, barely acknowledging my friend. Whenever we hang out with friends at restaurants or bars, she'd shower me with attention and affection in front of everyone sticking close to me. However, if I got up to order a drink or use the restroom, I'd return to find them deep in conversation and make it immediately change their behavior when I approached. Since my sister accused me of dominating conversations, I figured I was being overbearing and not giving them space to talk. So whenever I noticed this, I simply trusted them both completely. They both shared an interest in astrology and were thrilled that their zodiac signs matched as Virgos. Eventually, I grew uncomfortable with the direction the relationship was taking, so I decided to end it. She was persistent about us getting back together, putting in a lot of effort. She'd come over to my apartment after my work shifts, trying to seduce me. She'd be dressed in sexy lingerie and wouldn't leave until she satisfied me. However, things took a strange turn with my friends. My best friend started avoiding hanging out, and I noticed the rest of the group excluding me from their plans. I asked my buddy what was going on, why I wasn't being invited anymore, and he'd say it was all last-minute planning, and they assumed I'd be busy. Later on, another friend revealed that he would tell the group he wanted to invite me, but then tell them I was too busy to join. He never reached out to me. Instead, he contacted my ex and invited her. She was excited to go drinking and clubbing with the group, and him, every time. My best friend excluded me from events so he could invite my ex as his date in the group. Despite all the ongoing drama for months, she's putting in a lot of effort to get us to date again, doing all she can, and he's just enjoying the ride for now. I'll admit I'm not the strongest guy, and despite all the headaches she brought, I'd still fall for her visits because I knew she was up for some fun. Eventually, I wizened up and realized her constant presence was just giving me temporary satisfaction while preventing me from meeting new girls. I took a trip out of town for a few months to break the toxic cycle, but after a whole summer, I figured out that I genuinely enjoyed her company and should be open to compromises. We had been together for 2.5 years, so we already knew each other well. After months of not talking, I approached her and asked if we could start anew. She was really upset somehow, knowing that I had been dating someone else while we were broken up. I had no idea how to avoid disrupting my life in case this new attempt didn't work out. However, she oddly guessed many things about me with surprising accuracy. I was eventually compelled to admit, yeah, that actually happened. Sure, I did talk to another girl and a lot of other things she just wouldn't let go of. After she relentlessly pushed me and insisted that honesty was crucial for this to succeed, I ended up spilling all my private details, even though we were already broken up. Following this, she took it a step further, saying that simply sharing wasn't enough. And if I truly meant it, I had to marry her right then and there or make her pregnant that night. She caught me off guard by suggesting we elope, even proposing that we could get someone she knew as a witness and use a quick venue. I did want to reconcile, but both options felt extremely rushed. I thought that maybe if we had intimacy, I could avoid getting her pregnant, just like it had always been the case. So within a week, I chose to engage in unprotected intimacy with her as an alternative to getting married, and that's how things unfolded. After that, everything started to go downhill. Firstly, she was against taking a pregnancy test. We had a bunch of extra pregnancy tests, and even though I knew it was too early, I jokingly suggested that she pee on one of them. She came up with a ton of excuses for not doing it until a month later. I sometimes wonder if she was worried she might already be pregnant. On another note, once my best friend learned that I was taking my relationship with her more seriously, he got upset with me and started giving me reasons why I should consider dating someone else instead. Then we found out that she was pregnant from that night, and she gave me an ultimatum. But overall, things seemed good, and I was happy with how they were going. However, her sister started asking me strange questions like, "Why are you so nice to her? And why are you still with her?" Her family seemed surprised that I was continuing to date her. That's when I started noticing red flags. Her sister began mentioning things that she shouldn't have known about, like my best friend's nickname, the type of car he drives, and some of the music he liked. I asked her how she knew him, and she proceeded to tell me stories about how he frequented their house a lot. She described a time when they walked in on him licking her chest, and how she and my girlfriend stayed up late, discussing how my best friend was so desperate to be with my girl that he even performed BJ on her to persuade her to have intimacy. I didn't want to believe it, but I started keeping track of everything, she said. I observed things for months, and slowly everything started becoming clear. Learning about all this made me feel depressed, and I ended up drinking more than usual during her pregnancy. I hadn't confronted her about it yet, but it seemed like she could sense that something was about to blow up. I began asking vague questions and watched her squirm as she told lies. Then I'd witness one lie leading to another lie, trying to cover up the truth. She'd keep lying to me as if I had no clue. She'd look me right in the eyes and lie convincingly. My so-called best friend, who used to be quiet around me, couldn't even muster an apology when I confronted him. He just stayed silent, avoiding my gaze. As it turned out, he was the one feeding her information about my personal life that I had shared with him in confidence, all in an attempt to make her dislike me. The two people I trusted the most betrayed me. And the worst part is, they both teamed up against me. Now I'm stuck dealing with this overly apologetic woman who's raising my child. I'm also stuck with this lingering trauma that's made me reluctant to form new friendships or spend quality time with anyone because I fear getting hurt again by building connections. It's hard to trust people these days. I think that trauma has affected both of us because she cheated and lied to me repeatedly. It seems like she assumes I'm doing the same. Despite enduring all the pain and difficulties, I've remained completely faithful, yet I'm the one constantly on the defensive, facing groundless accusations. It seems like every other day a new insecurity arises and our arguments escalate to yelling, cursing, and slamming doors. My patience with her insecurities is wearing thin, and I've even reached a breaking point where I've cried, punched a wall, and injured my hand. I've never been aggressive before. I was shocked at how I lost control. I love my son deeply, and I can see that he's happiest when he sees his mom and me getting along. He's perceptive of and knows when things are going well between us. Capito. There are days when I try to avoid unnecessary fights with her by going for a drive, but when I return, the baby seems upset and only wants his mom. It feels like if we split up, it'll definitely affect him. However, if we stay and keep arguing all the time, we'll just set a bad example for him. It's painful. Even though I hated admitting it, she really pushed me to come clean before we decided to have a baby, but she never opened up herself. She never confessed that she was sneaking around with my best friend behind my back. And when I confronted her about it, she says, "I loved you so much that I did what I thought was necessary to keep us together. Sorry for loving you too much." Now she's saying we need to stay together for the sake of the baby, and that it's also the best choice for us. Sometimes it feels like I might have a heart attack from the dramatic and pointless arguments we have. It's kind of laughable, really. I'm trying my best to provide her with a good life, working and paying for everything while she stays home, but it doesn't bring me any satisfaction. It's like I'm doing this to prevent her and the baby from being hurt. That's when I start wondering why people resort to cheating, feeling trapped with no way out yet unable to stay in.